fuzzy.
Hello, my lovely, plagus-infested head splution friends. Today, I'm bringing you my review of the Resident Evil 4 remake. And the original Resident Evil 4, I adore. I cannot even describe how much I love it. It's one of my all-time favorite games. Thing is, when I heard that they were redoing all the voices, all the performances and everything, it made me feel very iffy about the remake. Like, that was one of my absolute favorite things about that game, was those specific performances, those specific lines, the specific writing, you know? But my worries did not ultimately keep me away from this game, because this game is a modern Resident Evil game, and modern Resident Evil games are, let's just say they got a track record. So now that I played the remake, does it live up to its very impressive legacy and my very high standards? Well, that's what we're gonna find out today. Let's go. Whoosh.
Ashley, are you all right?
Yeah, thanks.
Actually, the original Resident Evil 4 looked so good. It looked so unbelievably good for its time. It was very clear this was a very talented team, just like the environmental design, the texture work in particular. It was unreal. Like, it set a graphical standard that the series is still very much living up to today. It's almost exhausting talking about how Resident Evil games look, because it's so consistent. It's always the same story, you know? Like, this is a AAA experience through and through. The environments, it's always the environments in particular. They're just exquisite. Every inch of the game is so richly detailed, and like every corner of every room tells a story, you know? It's so real and lived in, but lived in by monster people, you know? Like, just everything you see supports the events that happened prior to you getting there. And sort of off topic, but the game gives you a lot more lore. Like, just little, I mean, like, there was lore and like documents in the first game, but I feel like these are a lot more detailed. They go into a lot more like specific detail about like the events that happened, and it even gives you like kind of like more details about some of the bosses and where they came from, and like, I just think that's incredibly cool. That really adds to the experience. But yeah, the environments, I mean, they're just incredible. The lighting is incredibly great. As always, as with any Resident Evil game, it is just a joy to behold. It is a sumptuous feast of visuals. I will say, this might just be me. I haven't seen anyone else say this, but like, is the game really dark to anyone else? Just kind of like hard to see. Like, it just takes me like extra brain power to try to see what's going on. I had to crank like the HDR, the brightness settings, all the way up. I've never had to do that with any other game, just maximum, and that makes it like pretty okay to see. Very weird, not sure what's up with that, but it looks great. And then of course, all like, you know, the enemy designs and everything, animations, it all looks really great too. I'd say there's one like new thing that kind of sets this apart from other Resident Evil games that I've played, and it's the chunky bits. It's the damage that is done to enemies. Resident Evil's always really had great animations and damage animations and all that stuff. This game takes it to another level. Like, the damage that you do, especially when you're like blowing something away with your shotgun, the way I hope you sent the kids to bed, the way the chunks fly off of them, like the flesh is so much more detailed, so much more realistically animated, and it's quite satisfying, let's just say that. And again, like all Resident Evil games, the sound design is also amazing, and like, I don't know, they've really zeroed in on something even better than usual with this one. Just, yeah, the audio-visual feedback of like shooting bad guys, especially when you snipe a guy in the head and it pops their head, just that kerpow, the feeling of it is just like the sound, oh, it's incredible.
All right.
So then, like, you know, realism and feedback and all that stuff, you know, the raw fidelity, that's not the only impressive thing about the visuals. It's also just like how faithful it is. This game is so faithful to the original. Like, all of the game's most iconic set pieces have been like perfectly preserved, and seeing them rendered so modernly with such detail. I mean, it's just a joy. It's surreal. It's really surreal running around just being like, oh my gosh, I'm playing Resident Evil 4, but what happened to it? Why does it look so good? You know, like the opening village area with the big chase, like it's very, very classic, and it's like totally redone, but just exactly the way you picture it in your head, you know? Like some places look very, very much like the original, but then other places have been given just kind of like a new, kind of going a new direction, but it's always a good direction. It's always just more cool and moody, and the use of lighting and color, it's uplifting everything exactly where it needs to be lifted up, and it is true to the original where it needs to be true to the original. You know, there's always just new little details to enjoy, and they're always amazing. And then of course, when talking about redoing original such and such, we gotta talk about the characters, and like I said, I was scared of this. I was really scared. I played Resident Evil 2. I haven't played 3 yet. But I was not like a super big fan of the characterization in that. A little bit too serious, just not what I fell in love with Resident Evil. And I'm like, how can I possibly enjoy this as much as the original if all the characters have been redone? Like, I just was so against that idea. And the thing is, the original is a lot cheesier. It's a lot cartoonier, you know. Those characters, they're larger than life. And I loved that. This is a lot more realistic. It's a lot more serious, and that sounds like a deal breaker. That sounds like it's exactly what I didn't want. But like, the thing is, it works. I don't know how they did it, but it really, really works. Like, this Leon is remake Leon, you know, the one from 2. I was not a fan of him at all in 2. I thought, like, okay, I heard people say the bingo line is still there. You know, some of the one-liners are still there, but like, hearing them come out of this Leon, how can that be good? How can that be any fun? I didn't think they would have the same impact coming from him. And while it is true that he's not as silly, he's not quite as snarky, yeah, it somehow just works. Like, he's way snarkier than he was in 2. He's a lot more similar to original Resident Evil 4 Leon, which is good. And you know what? He does some of the old one-liners, and he's got a lot of new one-liners too. Some of his interactions with like the villains are very funny. He's got this no-nonsense attitude. Pleasantly surprised in this department. Ashley has probably changed the most. The original, way more of a character, way just like spunkier, cartoonier, again, larger than life, a little bit cheesier, and it was really fun. This one, really realistic. Like, she's acted with utmost realism. Like, this is a movie. And again, seems like a bad thing. But the thing is, she's so well acted that the character works on a whole new level. She just feels so real, so like genuine, you know? And unlike the original, I actually empathize with her more. And like, her relationship with Leon feels more impactful. I never had any like emotional connection with the characters in the original. I liked watching them, but like, I didn't really like feel for them. I feel for them now. I value like what they both bring, you know? They're less like characters and more like humans. And this has helped so much by just like so many new little details in like animations and lines that they give, like both of them.
Jumping across chandeliers, seriously, who does that?
What are you, my mother?
They give these little one-liners, these little lines, just reacting to the situation around them, and it feels so organic, you know? Like, Leon gets out of a tough fight, you know, he'll like wipe his brow, he'll adjust his shoulder. Ashley will ask him if he's okay. And like, even during fights, like him and her, they'll give little bits of commentary, you know, like you'll like use your rifle to snipe a zombie's head off, and she'll be like, oh my gosh, like she'll have this like verbal reaction to it. Or like if you're aiming for a pendant, or you know, you get a guy with a good headshot, she'll like pump her fist a little bit.
You got it.
Like, it's so endearing. You do the shooting gallery and she gets like super excited. Like, whenever you do really well, she's like commentating the whole time. Just so many little things that it's great. It has such a huge impact on the enjoyability that I just did not expect at all. It's not the same as the original, but it's not worse. It's just good in a new way. And other characters, same thing, you know, like new Luis, he's probably the most like accurate to the original. But like, you know, the better graphics and everything, he's so expressive, and like they just gave us more of him, which is great. Like obviously in the original, he'd pop in, do a little thing, have a little cutscene, and then he'd leave, and it was always really frustrating when he left. But this one gives you so much more Luis, and I appreciate that so much. Again, I connect with him more, you know? And I won't talk about all the characters and the villains as much as I would love to just gush about every single one. But I'll say the same thing. Like the villains especially, they're just kind of, they're less cartoony. They're more realistic. They feel less like these archetypes, these cartoony tropes. And while that's great in the original, they feel more like people. And that gives them a lot more of just like a sinister air, you know, which again, I appreciate in its own unique way. And the best part about this is great. You get to have your cake and eat it too. Even though this is more realistic and it takes itself more seriously, there's still plenty of that Resident Evil cheesiness. You need the Resident Evil cheesiness, you know, especially in the dialogue. Some of the lines are just so silly, and it's just great. Again, I have my cake and eat it too. It's perfect. And like I said, there's new cheesy lines here, because this game just has a lot more dialogue in general. So there's like new things that I get to quote now on top of the originals. This is great. So let's get to gameplay. The controls are obviously very different here. That's really all I mostly wanted in a remake. I just wanted it to look better, and, you know, more modern visuals and more modern controls. You know, the original famously limited. You can't move and shoot at the same time. That's not how shooters tend to do it these days. This actually, like, it kind of swings hard in the other direction. It gives you a lot of movement. It feels a lot like 6, where like you're the character, like full character movement, you know, even if the camera is locked in place, the character will spin every which way. And I didn't like it in 6, and it took me a while to get used to here. But it clicked, and I really, really enjoy it. One of my big problems with 2 was that there's just not a lot of options to evade. I need to be able to evade. In real life, if a zombie is coming at you and it's about to hit you, you can take a step back, not just like inch backwards slowly, you know what I mean? So now you can kind of just sprint at any time and duck and kind of just move out of the way. It feels very natural. It feels good. You're a lot more empowered to get out of the way of enemy attacks. Then another big change, which was obviously going to happen, you can change weapons on the fly. You don't have to go into the menu to equip them each time. Very, very archaic. So yeah, this is much better. Surprisingly though, you still heal in the menu. I did not expect that. I don't know why. They just wanted to give you the ability to heal whenever. You pause and heal and then go back. Not sure why they did it that way. Kind of surprising, but I don't know. It's fine. And then like just the raw gameplay, just the running and fighting and stuff. It is terrific. You know, like it works with the foundation of the original. Absolutely. Like the ideas are all the same. You know, the melee system of stunning a guy and running up and kicking him. And now it's even got added stuff. With your knife, you can do these knife attacks rather than just swinging it wildly. You get to like stab him on the neck and stuff. And like enemy AI and animations are even the same, which is awesome. Like you can really, if you've played the original a lot, you can just slip right into it, you know? They reel back in a certain way, and I find myself like my muscle memory is engaging and like, oh, but his head's gonna be right here, and like it all works so perfectly. Like there's a lot of new stuff, but then like just enough of the old stuff that it still feels so familiar. And the original was so much fun, and this is just taking it to such a new level. More so than any of the other third-person Resident Evil games I've played. This really nails it. It takes that foundation, makes it just even stronger. Really big change though, real big change. Your knife breaks? What? You know, you go into the game feeling so confident. I've played the original 100,000 million times. I know what I'm doing. I pop a guy in the head, I kick him down, and I knife him until he dies. I cheese the whole entire game that way. No, you get here, your knife breaks, and it's like, oh no! Help, get me out of here, I can't do this! No, it's great. I mean, it's like the training wheels are off. You know, it's good to not be able to cheese it that way. It's a lot more just like a fair level of challenge. So I really appreciate that. And that opens up all of those other knife options. You know, you can parry attacks. I'm really bad at doing it, but you can, and that's cool. You can get out of struggles by using your knife, and that just gives you another thing to like upgrade and stuff. So I'm totally cool with that. Speaking of which, buying weapons, upgrading, all that stuff, it's all back with plenty of little changes. Just lots of little changes to the whole thing, and they're all good. I love all of them. You can craft ammo and stuff now, which is just phenomenal. I know with a lot of games, it feels tacked on, but every time they do it in Resident Evil, like, it works perfectly. It's the survival horror, it's the ammo conservation. It feeds into that so well. And of course, it lets you kind of tailor the experience a little bit more to your liking. You know, what weapons you use, it's not just based on what the game wants to give you. It's just like, well, I really like TMP, so I'm just gonna spend most of my resources on crafting TMP ammo. There you go, I can do that. Another aside though, speaking of like ammo and spawn rates and stuff, I will say like Resident Evil, one of the reasons they're so good is because they kind of adapt. It's like this adaptive difficulty thing. The game can tell if you've used all your ammo, so it might give you a little bit more. It knows how to keep you at a certain comfortable ammo amount, you know? So like it always feels like you're just barely getting by. And I really like that, but I will say this game, just because of the nature of the game, you're moving forward a lot more. Sometimes you're killing a lot more enemies, so it becomes a little bit more visible when the game does it, you know? Like I'll enter an area with like 30 enemies and I'm like, oh no, I've only got like a little bit of handgun ammo. And then I'll only use my handgun and get out of it with twice as much ammo as I started with, because I can see that the game is spawning it for me because I'm getting low on it. So like, it's a little bit immersion breaking, just a little bit of like, okay, it's a lot more visible. It's supposed to be this invisible background thing the game is doing. It's more visible this time, which is a little bit of a shame, but you know, whatever. But yeah, there's lots of other changes to items and stuff. Too many to go over all of them. One really great change is treasures with open slots, like to put gems into. Now, with all of them, you can choose which gems to put in, and there's like square ones and round ones. And there's different colors, and you can choose which colors go in, and you get different like cell value multipliers based on what colors you use. There's a little guide you can use, so that's a ton of fun. Just a lot more just fun customization. And then spindles used to just be a simple treasure, but now it's like a special currency that you can trade for like a specific menu of special stuff. Again, just another thing to do and enjoy. Awesome. In the original, there were a couple areas where you could shoot like all the blue medallions and like get stuff. But now they took that to another level. The merchant has all sorts of different requests that you can fill, and it's like, kill all the rats in this area, or lots of different medallion ones, just, or like, go back to this area and you'll find a super extra special hard enemy, and that's great because it's rewards, but it's also terrifying, just absolutely terrifying doing these. Loads of fun. Then another thing, in the shooting gallery, you can win coins and you can use them in this little gacha machine, and you can like win charms, which you put on your attaché case, and they'll give you like little static bonuses. And that's a really, really cool idea. But I will say it's very, like, it's really hard to do the shooting gallery. I don't have the patience for it. And so like, it really stinks to work really, really super hard to get 3 gold coins and use gold instead of silver. So you can roll, you have a higher chance of getting a really rare charm, and then you don't save because you forgot, and then you get a garbage common. And you're like, what was the point of any of that? So that's a little bit frustrating. I want more charms, but I don't want to do more shooting gallery. It's a whole thing. I know I could spend spindles on gold coins, but I don't want to use them all. Whatever, that's a whole thing. So it's neat that you can have, you know, you can get a couple different attaché cases, and like they'll give you different perks, and the charms will give you perks, and that's cool. Otherwise, the attaché case is pretty much the same, except in the original, you spend a lot of time managing your items, like just moving them around, combining them, you know, just trying to make room. You're like, I need to put this big giant fish in my case. I gotta make room. It was fun. Now you can just click a button and it auto sorts. I do miss those days to a degree, but This is objectively better. I must admit. Yeah, this is just a lot better. It's a lot less wasted time. And of course, I can't forget about the merchant himself. Speaking of characters, the guy doing the voice acting, he had big shoes to fill. The merchant is the Resident Evil 4 character. We're still quoting him to this day. And you know what? He does a good job. Couple things. He sounds a little bit young, and when he says stranger instead of stranger, it's weird, makes me cringe a little bit. Overall, though, he did a really good job, and the merchant has a lot more to say this time, and there's a lot of funny lines, and it's good. And, you know, he shows up a lot more often, which definitely hurts some of the tension in the game. You know, you think you're down somewhere deep and scary, and you turn a corner, and it's like, oh, look, a merchant. So yeah, it kind of breaks some of the tension, but it's also very, very convenient. There's always a merchant when you need one. It doesn't make you ever go too long without having access to one. So that's good. It's also very funny. It's just very funny the ways that he pops up sometimes. Oh, and speaking of convenience, you can now store weapons at typewriters. You can't store everything. You can't store ammo and stuff, which I get. It's frustrating sometimes when it's a kind of ammo that you're not even using that gun, but you don't want to get rid of it. You don't want to sell it, but you can't store it. It's so you don't just stockpile. They wanted to limit you. It's just for weapons and attachments, so I get that. But that's great. And even on the field, you can just send a weapon to your box. If you just, like, an emergency, you're like, I need to pick this stuff up, and you can just send a thing. Very convenient. Love that. It lets you have somewhat of a rotating arsenal of weapons without having to sell and rebuy, or just be like, sell and say goodbye forever. Very nice. So now that leaves us with the structure and the design of the world itself, and you know, all of the unique challenges and monsters and all that. And despite the fact that I have had lots and lots of glowing things to say about the presentation and the gameplay and the characters and all that, I would say that here is where the game truly shines as a remake. Many sequences have been faithfully recreated, like just about to a T, and then many of them have been, you know, slightly tweaked, usually tweaked just for the better, you know, like the original game had some kind of annoying bits that were like, you know, they stopped being tense and started just being stressful. A lot of those have been smoothed over. Some sequences have been removed, which is definitely a little bit disappointing sometimes, but then other brand new sequences have been added, and it really feels like every change has been made with such purpose, you know? Like, the game's pacing is so consistent now. Everything has been done to just make it more interesting and fun. I don't want to say streamlined, because that makes it sound more simple. It's not. It's just kind of better. It's just better paced. So often sequences will be expanded, or like they're, you know, between two familiar sequences, they'll put like another little transition thing leading to it. It's great. And one particular highlight is after you beat Del Lago and you open up the ability to drive a boat around the lake, this sequence has been expanded drastically. You can go around to all these different places, and you know, you can hit up old areas to get treasures and stuff that you missed. For just a little chunk of the game, you've got some open-ended exploration. And like, there are definitely other parts of the game where you kind of hang around a central area that you can kind of return to a little bit, especially in the castle. That's probably the other like main central hub area that you use. But I would have loved to see this idea explored even more. I would have loved to see more shortcuts opened up to older areas, you know, because like for the most part, it's usually pretty easy to track down all the treasures. But there are a few random little roadblocks and one-way doors that prevent you from getting treasures, and like, you're just like, why though? In all these other areas, you're making it easy to go back, but just every once in a while, you get those little roadblocks that feel just kind of unnecessary and frustrating. But yeah, overall, the game's design is terrific. And like, there are a couple enemies that were changed in a way that I'm like a little bit iffy on, just a little bit. And one of the scariest bosses of the original has just been removed. I don't know why. It's kind of an infamous boss. It was definitely a very stressful encounter, but I feel like they could have adapted it, because some of these enemies, some of these bosses are like totally different. And it's always like for the better too, you know, like, oh my gosh, some of them have been improved so much. They're so much more fun. One in particular is just like, it is so good. So I feel like they could have adapted instead of removing that one. I don't know, maybe it'll be in DLC or something. But yeah, like it's really just about everything has just been improved, you know, just boss fights. They're more interesting. They're less fiddly. They're less frustrating. They're just more fun, and they're designed to be so tense. These unbelievably intense encounters that just make you feel so amazingly cool when you get out of them alive, you know? And I know that's what Resident Evil is, but like actually seeing how these old designs have been updated, like versus, you know, fighting something that's completely new, it really lets you see the design process in action and like how Capcom has zeroed in on what makes a boss fight good. It's truly remarkable to see. And then even with non-boss enemies, there are all these little changes. Some enemies have been expanded, given new abilities, which just add to the depth of the experience, make them so much more fun to fight. Everywhere you look, all these little things that make you go, oh, wow, oh, that's so cool. Oh man, that used to be like this. Now it's like, oh, that's great. Or, oh, that's so scary. So scary. Final odds and ends before we wrap this up, just because sometimes I do a poor job of structuring. You just gotta throw in the final little tidbits. I talked about Ashley as a character, but not yet as a mechanic. It's funny because like she was like the original escort mission, and then everybody else did escort missions, but she was like the only one that ever actually worked and wasn't just frustrating, you know? She was really good at staying out of the way, and here largely the same, but they have changed it quite a bit. Now you do not manage her health, which is kind of nice. You don't have to worry about using up yellow herbs to try to get her health up. Instead of her health going down, if she takes damage, she kind of falls down and becomes incapacitated, and you have to run up and hit R1 or whatever to help her out. Which is, it can make you feel a little bit vulnerable, and there were a couple times where I was getting a little bit frustrated with it because the amount of time it takes to pull her up, and then you just get hit again. So it's a little iffy on that, but now it's a lot simpler to command her. You know, used to have like, wait, follow me. You know, you can make her just stop or make her follow you, but now instead it's like tight formation, loose formation, you know, make her run right along beside you or behind you, or just kind of like spread out and stay out of danger. Yeah, it's kind of different. I don't even necessarily know if I really prefer one way or the other. It kind of just still works. I think if there was more of the game where you had her and you were getting in these really dangerous fights, then it might start to get frustrating. But it could, and it feels like you have her less in this game. Something to do with like the pacing of the game. She spends more time separated from Leon, I think. Could be wrong on that, but never really gets in the way, you know? There are times when she's with you and it's a little bit more tense and you gotta try to help her, and there are plenty of times where she's not. So yeah, I don't know. There's changes, but it's just still kind of works, doesn't it? Then it's funny because similarly, this game is the original was the game that really, I don't want to say invented, but kinda invented QuickTime events. And then again, everybody else did it, and yet like, it was never as good when they did it. I know everybody got pretty tired of them. I've never like really hated QuickTime events. I thought the ones in the original were fine, especially in the Wii edition because they were just really easy. It's funny, they're all gone here. Like, they made an active choice to just not have any. Yeah, it's funny, I'm fine with them. Just a couple, especially like during a cutscene, you know, you gotta cut the rope or whatever, you just mash A. I don't know, it adds a little bit of like interactivity to some of the cutscenes. But not having them is definitely, lets you relax a little more. It lets you just kind of like enjoy a cutscene where two characters are fighting because you're not worrying about like the action command coming up and you gotta hit it right. So yeah, like I would have been fine if it was still there, but it's a fine choice to just kind of not. They tried to put things more naturally. Like the closest you have to a quick time event is there are certain things that happen, certain attacks where you gotta like hit the crouch button or whatever to like dodge out of the way. I'm terrible at this. I'm so bad at it. I just can't see it coming fast enough. But I appreciate that it's built into one of your moves. It's not just hit these buttons because we're telling you that that's the only way to dodge this attack. It's more of a natural way that I can appreciate. And the final thing I want to mention, you know how like in a lot of games, you'll have that thing where you beat the last enemy and the game like shows you definitively that you have beaten the last enemy. You know, the character puts their gun away, the music changes or whatever. This is sometimes a little bit disappointing to me because it removes the tension. It lets you know that you're safe, which is kind of good because then you can just kind of explore an area and that's cool. But I also like the tension. At least to my knowledge, off the top of my head, I can't think of another game that does it this way, where if you're in a big area with a lot of enemies, they will basically spawn like in certain areas of this area. You beat a bunch of the enemies that came at you and you beat them all. You got to walk a little further in order to spawn more. I know that itself is not a weird concept, but like the way it marries with the music. When you beat the last enemy and the music just stops dead silent. So there's this like, especially like after a really big encounter, there's this like, you breathe out and it feels really, really good. And the original was like that, but I feel like in the original, they'd all spawn at the same time and they'd all come at you, and when that music stopped, you knew that you were good. But now you have these bigger areas where you get that moment, you get that breather where you know, at least for the moment, at least right now, there's nothing coming after me. I can reload all my guns and pick up some stuff, but it doesn't remove the tension entirely, because then if you move on a little bit, enemies spawn right there. So it's kind of like this back and forth, this give and take. And I feel like that is a perfect kind of marriage of these ideas, a perfect happy medium that I've not quite seen it a lot in games. And it's really, really effective. So to wrap things up, the Resident Evil 4 remake is unbelievable. I am floored by it. There are so many questions to consider when remaking a game. It's such a complicated business, you know? Like, how much do you change? How much do you keep the same? When does it stop being a simple remake and start being a reimagining? Should it be a reimagining? Should you just do the graphics again? How faithful should you be? And it's different for every game. And like, no matter what you do, you're probably gonna disappoint a good number of fans of the original. I expected to be more disappointed with this game, but Capcom has walked such an incredibly thin tightrope here. Such a razor-thin line. They have walked it. This game is a faithful adaptation of the original, but with updated, modernized controls and quality of life improvements and all that. But it's also, in a sense, a reimagining that kind of expands things and changes things. Like, the whole thing isn't reimagined, but it considers and reimagines individual elements as needed. They have combed over the entire game to decide what individual. They've taken 1,000 different elements and thought, maybe more than that, and just like looked at each one. What should still be here? What should be changed? What should be removed? What needs more? And it so successfully keeps what is most important, but is not afraid to make changes that'll just make the game better. You know, like, at times you're looking at a perfect recreation of the original, only with modern graphics. And at other times you're looking at something so fresh and new and surprising, and it even will play with your expectations based on your knowledge of the original. It'll kind of toy with you and play with you, which is just another level to enjoy. It's a faithful remake, and it's a reimagining. It's both. I don't know how they did it, but it's both. It is clear. I guess I know how they did it. It's love. It's love. It's a great intuition of what makes a good game. They were clearly very passionate and really finally understood the original and what people liked about it. And because they have walked that line and just so perfectly executed this is a perfect remake, but doesn't replace the original. Whenever you do a remake, a modernized remake, a reimagining or whatever, you run the risk of kind of replacing the original. But it just doesn't, despite being so much better in so many ways. It still leaves the original intact. It changes what needs to be changed, but it doesn't change so much that you just go, oh, you know, a bunch of people aren't just like, whatever, I'll just stick to the original, who cares? It's got all these things that are uniquely great, and it's so much easier to play for so many reasons, but I know that someday I will return to the original, and I'll miss the quality of life stuff and the fancy graphics, but then I could just go back to that one. It's funny, there are plenty of times in this game when I noticed they just took out little things, you know, especially like in cutscenes, little sequences, little things that just kind of took him out, like, oh, he didn't do that thing. He didn't do that funny thing. And at first it was disappointing, but then I slowly realized the more I played the game and the more I came to understand the game, I realized that feels deliberate, because they're like, we're not trying to just remake everything about the original. They're leaving a lot of that stuff with the original because that fits in with that game's identity. It still leaves so much to enjoy, so that if anyone does play this and they like it and they haven't played the original, there is every reason to go back to the original and enjoy that for what it is. Because these two games are each remarkable in their own ways. Resident Evil 4 is as close to a perfect remake as I might ever play. And being a remake that's that good of one of the funnest games of all time, then that just makes for another unbelievably fun game. One that, because of all the new game pluses and difficulty options and stuff, I am sure I will be playing for a long, long time, just like the original.
So there you have it. Capcom has made an incredible modern version of Resident Evil 4. Capcom made an amazing, just incredible, can't put it down, modern Resident Evil game? I'm flabbergasted. I don't know what to say. This is, I did not see this coming. I didn't plan for this.